Welcome back to Big Brave Business. I'm your host, Sarah K. Heater. Big Brave Business is a podcast where we challenge the status quo of traditional business practices. So if you're ready to challenge norms, rewrite the rules, and redefine what it means to lead with courage and integrity, then grab a notebook and let's dive in. Welcome back to Big Brave Business. I am so excited to introduce you to my guest today because if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, first of all, thank you. But second of all, you heard Amanda and I talk about Katie over and over and over on the show. That's my guest today. Katie Carson is just a phenomenal human, and she was a listener of the podcast first, and then that's how we actually ended up connecting. Now she is on the Podfox team as an account manager, and she also does some like client support and like media and PR. And the main thing that we first connected on was Katie's expertise in her own offers for supporting like marketing and content repurposing. And she has a really freaking interesting corporate history. She has her own podcast called Ditch the Ick, which obviously Podfox produces. And it's interesting. It's all about being like a single woman in your 30s and what that is like. So it includes dating, but it also includes so many other things of just like the experience of being a 30-something single woman. And yeah, we're also just getting closer and closer as friends. I feel like every day we talk about all the things. So of course I wanted to have Katie on the podcast. So Katie, welcome to Big Brave Business.
I'm so excited to be here. I don't know if you remember, but I was on your YouTube channel too. We did the rapid fire questions. So I'm so excited to be back for the actual podcast.
Yeah. And I'm so glad that we were able to do that because I was thinking it's so surreal to me that you have never been on Big Brave Business. But of course it makes sense because Amanda and I did not do guests on the regular podcast in the past. That's why we started the YouTube channel originally. And we wanted a chance to connect with friends and things like that. But it's really surreal because in my head, I so strongly associate you with Big Brave Business since that's how we even met each other in the first place. But I'm curious because obviously you've somehow found the podcast and we're listening. And so let's just start at the beginning with this concept of being big and brave in business. And I'm curious for you, and then I'll share mine too. What does being big and brave in business mean to you?
Oh, there's so many things. I think it means defining your own success primarily, like not being afraid to accept or vocalize or say that success means something different to you than the 5K months or the 10K months that I feel like you see a lot, especially in the online service provider space, which is where I spend a lot of my time. And I think because we met about a year ago, actually, it was almost exactly a year, but last year I spent a lot of time defining my success that way. And that was a really big learning curve for me, was learning that didn't define my success as an entrepreneur. Like just the fact that I've made it now a year and a half, almost 2 years supporting myself without a corporate 9-to-5 is big and brave. And taking that leap was like the best choice that I've ever made. And I think it's also different because I feel like there are a lot of people, especially women, who take the leap into entrepreneurship when they're partnered, but not as many single people take the leap into entrepreneurship because what's your safety net, right? Like we always feel like we can't take that leap until situations or whatever kind of arise. And we feel like we have no other choice. So we're just going to finally do it. And that's what I did. And it's okay to build the plane as you go, as you fly.
Yeah, I think being in leadership in business in any context includes building the plane as you fly. That's just what leadership looks like, and especially entrepreneurship, which is really interesting. It's funny because I did obviously have a partner when I started my business. When I left, I'm going to call it the corporate world, although my last 9-to-5 was not very corporate. I worked for a really small business, these two like zany entrepreneurs who actually are still clients of mine today. But when I decided to leave the 9-to-5 life and start my own venture, I did have a partner. However, he was working part-time at a movie theater, and he was a full-time grad student. So the safety net was that I had a support system in him, but not a financial safety net in him, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like it can relate to both sides. I definitely would never have been brave enough to do it if it weren't for having a partner. So I can really respect and admire like making that decision on your own. Like entrepreneurship is lonely even when you have a partner. So not having a partner to have your back and support you in that, I think has to be really hard. And then I think it's also interesting to note that some people who are trying to build businesses or are successfully building businesses may also have partners who are not supportive, and that also would be really lonely.
Yeah.
So not trying to assume that everybody that has a partner is supportive, because I did make that comment, but that's interesting. I think being big and brave in business to me is really putting yourself out there is a big part of it. And that looks like so many things. I think it's putting yourself out there to sell. It's putting yourself out there. It's like taking risk in general and deciding to start, deciding to go all in, deciding to go full time, deciding to do things differently. Those all count, but this all feels so risky. And sometimes I can understand the mentality of it would be easier to just get a 9 to 5 working for someone else, just let someone else pay me and tell me what to do. Now, I do tend to think I am not yet far enough removed from my 9 to 5 life that I forget what it was actually like working a 9 to 5. And so I do think that people who say that about entrepreneurship, like it'd be easier to go get another job, I think you haven't had another job in a while, because actually I think that's so hard. And I would choose entrepreneurship 10 out of 10 times.
And two, that's just also not taking into account the job market, right? Like one of the reasons I ended up in entrepreneurship was because I was in a really toxic bro culture, like terrible performance marketing company that was doing some borderline illegal things. I'll just be straight up. And I knew too much. And I was like, this does not align with my values or who I am or where I want to be. I got to get out. And I interviewed and applied to hundreds of jobs. I didn't interview at hundreds of jobs. I interviewed at maybe 5 of the 100. And when you look at my background, like it shouldn't be too hard for me to get a job, but the job market has been absolutely insane. So even the thought of, could you even go get a 9 to 5? I couldn't get another one, but I also couldn't stay where I was. So I was like, cool, we're going to do this. We're going to see if it works. If it doesn't, we'll figure it out. And then I was also really lucky to get a corporate contract, which was so great for me and my mental health and my stability for the last 6 months or so. But it also was great in that it was part-time and it reminded me why I left corporate.
Yeah.
If anything, it reaffirmed my dedication to my business.
Yeah. I think for me, leaving corporate, a big part of it was reflecting that my 9 to 5 life and all of my previous, not all of my previous jobs, but almost all of my previous jobs included doing work I didn't care about with people I didn't like for most of the hours I was awake. And that meant that the little bit of time that I did have with the people and the things that matter most to me, I didn't have anything left to give them.
Right.
And realizing that for me, that just felt so backwards. And I think a lot of people can relate to that feeling, even if you haven't started a business and don't intend to, or maybe you think maybe there's a whisper, maybe one day I could do it. Maybe you relate to that feeling of, I will never forget telling Eric to leave his job before, when he was doing grad school and working in a movie theater. What led to that was him exiting a really toxic job. And I will never forget him talking to me about it. And he was struggling. And I looked at him and I was like, this job is killing you. Just quit. And he was like, seriously? And I was like, yeah, I'm seeing it kill you. And I can't support that. And we'll fucking figure it out. But you got to go. And he's, you need to tell me right now if you really mean that, because I will walk in and quit tomorrow. And if you don't mean it, tell me now. And I was like, what kind of partner would I be to tell you to keep doing this job? Like you've got to quit. We will figure something else out. So that really was like the beginning, I think, of us being big and brave in business, because sometimes being big and brave means quitting something that is killing you.
Oh my God, for sure. I've did that several times in my career before I decided to do entrepreneurship. I worked in the federal government at the CIA, and that was killing me personally because I was lying to everybody I knew. There was no way I was ever going to meet someone as a single person in my mind, because everybody at the agency was a trained liar and the divorce rate was really high internally, but also you were starting any external relationship on a lie. So I took a huge pay cut, moved back to Florida, which is something I swore I'd never do, and took a job at McKinsey to have that better work-life balance, because I really didn't have a lot to give at the end of the day. I wanted something that was a little more flexible. At least I could take my laptop home. I didn't have to stay in a building with no cell phone all day. But then at McKinsey, it was the same thing. I was traveling 70% of the time. And it was like a Friday to a Friday. So it wasn't like Monday to Thursday like the consultants were doing. I was doing learning programs. So it was like 10-day spans. I wasn't able to make a lot of friends in the Tampa area because I was gone so much. And when I was back, I had nothing left to give.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, I had so many calls. I also had nothing left to give. And I took another big pay cut and took a job locally just to take a breath because I had to take medical leave. Like it had gotten that bad.
Yeah.
And I think all of those decisions were big and brave. It was questioned a lot by people in my life, but ultimately they weren't the ones having to live with it. Maybe my best friend, who ever like at each point she'd be like, hey, so I think we've reached that time where you've been calling me every day crying after work for the last couple of weeks. So I think we've reached that point where we maybe need to reevaluate your life choices. But I think also the perk of being single in this has been that while there isn't that necessarily support at home or somebody else that I can really rely on or bounce things off of, there's also nobody holding me back.
Yeah.
And because like you said, not all partners are supportive, right? There's not somebody there that I don't have to take in consideration that I have kids, or I have Archie and I can feed him and then we're good. Archie's a dog, to clarify. I forget this isn't my podcast where I talk about him all the time. But like if I didn't do it now, I would never have done it, is what I realized. And life is just too short for that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to think back, or like, oh, I did this a couple of times in my like past career where here's where I was big and brave. And I'm reflecting on my past career and thinking about what did I do that was big and brave? And honestly, I wasn't big and brave. And I can think back to specific instances, even all the way back to interning and then throughout my career where I wish I had been bigger and braver. I think I spent so much of my early career, like pre-entrepreneurship, I spent so much of my career being hungry and eager and just working really hard and hoping someone would notice and give me a chance. And I think that's something that probably a lot of women, especially like overachieving women, can relate to, which is this idea that if I show up and I work really hard and I am like just adding as much value as possible, that it's going to pay off and that's the right way to do things. Whereas I think stereotypically, and not all hashtag not all men, but I think not all men have this confidence. But I think that generally speaking, the part of the reason for things like the wage gap or like the leadership gap are because men do take bigger risks, put themselves out there, speak up at the table instead of waiting to be invited to. And I think I felt so I felt so frustrated feeling like, please just invite me to speak. Please just invite me to the head of the table. Like I'm performing at the top of my class. Please just recognize me instead of just recognizing myself. And I think I wish that I could go back and tell myself in my previous jobs, you can be bigger and braver.
So speaking up was really not a thing I had a problem with. But you have to consider too, like my first real job was Homeland Security doing contracting with a bunch of surly ex-military men. And if there's one thing this Florida redneck born and raised girl knows how to do, it's how to be one of the boys. And so I took a lot of my cues from them, while obviously maintaining a little bit more professionalism and definitely no sexual harassment. But that gave me, I think, the confidence to speak up. I also realized how much I had to offer, and I'm an external processor, so I honestly can't help a lot of the time but to speak it out loud and to work through it. So I'm really grateful for that. But I really identified with what you said about hustling and doing my hard work and adding as much value as I can and hoping somebody would recognize me. Because while I didn't have a problem speaking up, and a good amount of the time I was heard, at least in that capacity at the agency, not so much, it still wasn't recognition. It still wasn't moving forward. And I think because, like you said, like especially the high achieving women, we're taught in general, right? I think this is a millennial thing. Like, we're just caught in this weird generation. We were taught, you go to school, you get good grades, you go to college, you get good grades, you graduate, you get a job, and people will recognize you and promote you, and that's how it works. And that's not. It's genuinely not how it works. A lot of the time, the people who get promoted places are the people nobody wants to deal with anymore, so they move them up and out. At least in the federal government, that was how that worked. But the people who worked hard tend to get penalized for that by getting more work, more responsibility without the pay raise, without the title bump.
Yeah.
And it also has a lot to do with
Or
the
like, here's a 25-cent an hour raise because
yeah,
we see you and we see your hard work. I've heard from so
here's a pizza party, guys. Have
yeah,
a good time.
that's the equivalent of that, yeah. I've heard from so many people in my life, so many women who have also been told things like, "You're too valuable in this position,
Uh-huh.
and I can't
Uh-huh.
afford to lose you from this position,"
Mhm.
and so we get
Mhm.
stuck, and my mom and I have talked a lot. I think you'll really resonate with this from what you were saying too about people being penalized, when they're hardworking and effective. My mom and I have talked a lot about the good kids get in trouble for the littlest thing, quote unquote the good kids, right, at work, and the
Right.
quote unquote troublemakers at work, the ones who don't have as high of performance, the ones who don't show up as often or don't show up often at all, or the ones who are late all the time, or the ones like they can get away with a lot more. And when they show improvement, there's this big dramatic, wow, look how much they've improved. Whereas the person who's been outperforming them the whole time doesn't get the same level of recognition because they're not improving because they were already outperforming everyone.
I felt that on so many levels as a student, as a professional, as an eldest daughter. I felt that. I was the good kid until college. And like when I did things like if I kept straight A's, it really wasn't that big of a deal. But if like my brother got straight A's, who's 5 years younger than me, it was like a much bigger deal. It was like lauded and applauded and like all of this. Like I could win all of the awards and it was meh, you win awards all the time. And it's
Right.
like, cool, great, but let's not dive into my childhood trauma. But I think
Well,
it's something that we're
it
raised to
is
do at a very young age.
it is interesting because all of our childhood trauma shows up in business, right? Like in
Mhm.
leadership and in business and especially in entrepreneurship. And I've been talking about that a little bit on other episodes of this season too. And Amanda and I talked about this, of course, too, where, yeah, like your relationship with money, your relationship with other people, your relationship with yourself, the way that you take up space in the world, all is formed in childhood. And that shows up big time when you, especially when you're in a position of leadership, like trying to run a business. It's this suddenly the benefit for me, like I was talking about earlier, I in my previous jobs, I was waiting to be invited to speak. Please invite me. And it's not that I didn't speak up at meetings. I did. I could have done more, but I did. It's more I want to be at the front of the room. Like ask me what I think, right? Like I have so much to offer and I can specifically remember the two zany entrepreneurs that I mentioned that I used to work for that are current clients of mine that we produce their podcast still. I can remember there was this consultant guy that they eh, had a lunch with or something, and he had given them some thoughts. And the three of us were at lunch together, me and the two guys who ran this business. And they were talking about they had just had this lunch with this consultant guy, and he was talking about some stuff with marketing. And they were like, man, he's really smart. Maybe we have to figure out how to bring him in as a consultant. And I just saw an opportunity to speak up and I was like, "Hey, yeah, I really like what he said about this and this because I've been thinking," and I like shared my own thoughts and there it was like a cartoon, like their jaws basically dropped and they were like, "We don't have to hire him, we have you." And it's I had already been working for them for 2 years. Like, how did you not know this about me? That's how I felt at the time. But I can reflect back and see like, when was I big and brave before that moment to let them know this is who they hired, right? Like I was so focused on doing a good job at the job they tasked me with that I wasn't showing them what more I could do because I was trying to show them how effective I was at this specific role. But that's not going to help you get elevated. And it's just interesting. Like, I'm a person who I was a straight A student. I was recognized by adults all the time. I was a hardworking overachiever my whole life. And even in college, adults, I guess you're an adult in college, quote unquote, but a pseudo adult, the
Okay.
older adults that knew me in college, I can remember them making comments about, we can't wait to see what you're going to do after college. We can't wait to see,
Yeah,
which first of
people
all
kept
is so
saying that
much
to me.
pressure. But so many adults my whole life that were like, oh, what great thing
Yeah.
is Sarah going to go do? And then I didn't know how to be a leader. That's so
Well,
interesting.
tangent on that. Like I had that too all through school. And when I look back at it, the amount of times that made me question and stay in jobs longer than I needed to, because while everybody expects me to do these great things,
Yeah.
and staying in those places because of that expectation, when it was hurting me
Yeah.
and not helping me. Like it's so not helpful. So parents out there, please don't put a lot of expectations. Just say, I'm so proud of you. You're going to do great things, but don't be like, I can't wait to see what you get up to after college, or I can't wait to see what great things you're going to do later in life. Because then there's this pressure of, what is your definition of great? Because your definition of great and my
That's a
definition of
whole
great are
other
two very different
conversation.
things.
Yeah, that actually I think is interesting because I actually love hearing that. I still love hearing that. I like when people say, I like when I meet with somebody that I feel is a bigger fish than me or swimming in a whole bigger pond than I'm swimming in.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a network meeting and I share like an introduction to myself and my business. And they make comments like, okay, where do we invest? Okay, like, how to sign us up? We're interested.
Yeah.
How do I support you? What? This is something I want. This is a buggy that I want to attach my horse to, or whatever. Maybe it's the other way. This is a horse I want to
Tell
attach
me you've
my
been tell me you've been watching Bridgerton without telling me you've been watching Bridgerton.
I'm not sure what the expression is that I'm looking for, but the point is like that is something I want to be part of. That is, or oh, I can't wait to see where this goes. I can't wait to see what we're gonna do with
Yeah.
it. That is a huge compliment to me. And I like my Enneagram 3 wing 4 heart is just like a flutter with yes, tell me all the things I'm great at. That is it feels good, but it is interesting from like a parenting standpoint because I think, and this is so hard to do, but I think what would be so much more interesting would be to say, what do you want to do? And I think when you're a kid, you don't know how to answer that because you have such a limited view of what you could do. And this is where my Girl Scout side really comes out because so much of what we do in Girl Scouts is helping girls identify problems in their communities and then learn about what the root cause is of that problem and then develop projects to handle the root cause, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so they're learning how to do that. And I think that is just like such essential work for women to then be able to grow up into adults who are identifying problems in society and
Yeah.
not just, yes, it's one thing to like want to then handle the symptoms, right?
Yeah.
And I could almost even say, like, this is a big part of why I think a lot of women go into nursing. And no shade to nurses, love you, appreciate you, so grateful for you, especially in the past 4+ now years of public health crisis. This
Like,
world could not exist without you. Thank you for everything you do. And I think, like, a big part of why so many women are drawn to things like nursing are, first of all, we are socially like bred to be the caretakers of society, but secondly, the way we're taught to pursue leadership as girls and women is to take care of symptoms. Like, what is the symptom and then how can I handle that symptom, instead of looking at what are the root causes and how do I prevent that root cause from continuing to be an issue, and that's activism, right? And so I think that tends to skew so much more male because that's how men are taught to pursue leadership literally from the time they're babies playing with male-oriented toys.
oh, yeah.
Sarah's rant.
Well, and not only that, like it ties into the wage gap too. I know we touched on this briefly, but I did an episode in March about the gender pay gap. And one of the studies that I referenced, and I don't remember the name or the exact specifics. So sorry. It was 3 months ago, 2 months ago, whatever. I had no voice and it was a problem. Was that from a young age, like they would test these kids and they would put these like 2, 3 year olds, maybe like 5. I don't know, between 2 and 5, it's a real blurry line for me. And they would have them make this art. And then they would ask the boys, like, oh, how much do you want to sell it for? And then like they would ask the girls separately. And consistently the girls asked for way less than the boys. And when asked why, it was like, I just didn't want to upset anybody. I didn't want to make anybody mad or make anybody feel bad. So give me less because I don't want to upset the status quo. And that's another thing that's just bred into us from a very young age that we have to like actively work against and deprogram ourselves.
Okay, so I can go even younger with a study that I learned about in Girl Scouts a few years back. My local council brought in a consultant who was talking about, and I mentioned this on a recent episode of this podcast too. My worlds are blending, but where they talked about basically they were talking about gender differences and how important it is for girls to have access to girls only spaces. That was the premise. That's what I've referred to on this podcast before. But the reason why they brought them in is because Boy Scouts started recruiting girls into programs from kindergarten through 5th grade. And there were a lot of people who were saying this is such a progressive moment that girls now have access to Boy Scouts, when the Girl Scout community was saying actually it's the opposite. But one of the things that they shared about, that this consultant shared about the differences in really early socialization with genders goes all the way back to babies and toddlers, where they would give them like different obstacles like a string to pull, and it would have resistance, and the girls would give up way more quickly than boys would give up. Boys would just continue. And so they're learning resilience early, and also like a false sense of effectiveness as well.
Oh yeah. Let me just push through and like barrel in.
Yes. And I thought that was a really interesting, and there were other examples too, but like you were saying with the art and how much girls versus boys would ask to charge. And this is all very this is all very gender binary speak. And I want to just mention that part of the reason why is because a lot of historically done studies are based on a gender binary. So we don't have a lot of data available. But I will say that the consultants about the specific study I was referring to, they did mention not non-binary or gender fluid. They did not have data on that. But what they did say is that the sort of outliers or anomalies, and as far as kids who grew up to be able to articulate that they identified as trans, and that their behavior in the study actually performed more like the gender they identify with and not the sex they were assigned at birth, which I thought was really interesting as well.
That's the similar thing that they found in a lot of the gender pay gap studies and a lot of the studies on negotiating too, like for your salary and whatnot, and how in a gender binary world, that's how they do it. But they found that way with trans women too, like that they also suffered from the same gender pay gap. And there's that intersectionality there that we were talking about before the podcast. And it's wild too, but because at the same time, if we plowed in there with our audacity of a middle-aged white man, it's also
or a white male toddler.
Or a white male toddler. Listen, as somebody who's
not that different,
4 white nephews who are all under the age of 6, yeah, they got a lot of audacity. Just spent the weekend caring for one of them. Now I've lost my train of thought. Oh, but if we come in there and we barrel in and we try to negotiate like men, it's also viewed negatively. So it's like we're stuck in damned if we do, damned if we don't. We're allowed to curse on this, right? I feel like I probably have already cursed. Okay, great. I thought so, but it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. Because if you come at it like, hey, I have done X, Y, and Z, I deserve A, then it's, oh, you're hard to work with. You're really like pushy and nobody wants to work with you. You're hard to work with. So it's finding what works for you and your personality and your way of communication, right? Like you can only control you. You can't control how the other person perceives you, but figuring out what works best for you and how you can best articulate yourself is really important. And I think that also ties back into being able to define success for yourself, right? Like success for you, if you're still in a corporate job, may not be a pay raise. It may be more flexible work. It might be like a hybrid situation or going fully remote. There's so many different things that it could be, and not letting yourself be defined by one aspect of quote unquote success.
Yeah. And on that note, I'm interested to know what you think as far as there's a lot of bad advice out there. And so I'm curious, what is some of the worst advice out there that you learned from the hard way?
Oh, like just going and so I can think of a very prime example. So I was a government contractor, it was my first job. And there's a lot of weird rules with government contracting, right? Like with what you can and can't do. But like on our contract, the lines were like pretty blurred because we worked really closely with the feds, the govies. And one of them at a happy hour, we had a branch happy hour and we were out and there's a definite boys club. And I had just been standing there talking to some of them about something stupid, like with the boys club. And the branch chief said to me, I just really think that you're wasting your talents. And I was like, cool, thanks. That's helpful because there's nothing you can really do to help me about it. And some people were around that heard it and they were like, you need to just go into his office tomorrow and be like, hey, I need to know more about what you mean that you think I'm wasting my talents. And so I went in there and asked him that. And he created a whole new position for me, not a pay raise, but like a whole new position for me on the contract, which technically isn't really a thing. And so it caused a lot of issues with my project manager and like the company that I actually worked for. So learning, if I had approached it a little bit differently, if I had involved my project manager in the conversation instead of just like barreling into this guy's office and be like, look, I would do it. So like, why can't I? I'm sure it probably wouldn't have been as big of a fucking deal if it was a man, but that's a whole other thing. If I had learned to go through the appropriate channels or like just involve the right people in the conversation, I think it would have been a lot different. But I also don't have any regrets about doing it, because it set me on a path to really change what I was doing within the government. I moved into operations, which was then one of the reasons why I got into the agency. I can't really regret doing it, but I did learn better ways to go about things and how to communicate and ask for what I want and express when I felt like I wasn't being seen, heard, or appreciated.
Yeah, that's so interesting because on as you were telling the story, I was thinking like, "Ooh, an opportunity," and then you're like, "Here's all the ways it was not what I wanted it to be, or what I needed it to be, or it did not actually like help. It actually caused harm."
Right. Like I just genuinely went in there for like just a conversation with him. I was just like, hey, I'm really curious, like, where do you see my strengths? Because like government isn't something I ever saw myself doing. So I'd love to hear
Mhm.
what you think my progression is, because I don't know.
Yeah,
But what came out of it was, you're doing this now?
interesting,
You're gonna
interesting,
sit over here? And I was like, okay.
interesting. Yeah, that's seems like more audacity of men of he just decided this is just how I'm changing things, and it was like, whoever this affects, be damned. So I can think of a couple of examples for me of, let's say, advice I learned from the hard way. One thing that is advice definitely that falls into that category is the blanket advice of just raise your prices as far as like entrepreneurship goes.
Oh, yeah.
I think we hear this all the time that like it's a common coaching mantra of, hey girl, raise your prices, or hey, here's your permission slip to raise your prices, or like when's the last
Or
time you
like,
raised your prices or
the
whatever.
reason you're not booking clients is because you're charging too little. So
That's
you're
even going
attracting the wrong
deeper about
client.
it. Yeah. And I had a coach a few years ago who was talking with me about my goals and where I wanted to be and what I wanted to do. And she was like, I want to talk to you about your pricing. I'm really excited to work with you on let's raise your prices. Like, where should your prices actually be? Now, granted, at the time, I did need to raise my prices. I did. But, and I can't imagine if my business was still operating at the price point that I was charging at the time that I first hired her. I can't imagine how much work I do that I would not be able to pay my team, and so it wouldn't be possible. So I totally did need to raise my prices. And what she did was she took the number that I came up with and she was like, let's double it. And as far as like the amount of increase, let's double the amount of increase. And we were talking about how much money that would look like times how many clients. And I got excited about that number, duh, because of course I want to make a lot of money. And I did, because I'm me, start considering, okay, at that price point, does my offer need to change? What needs to be included for me to be able to justify that price point? And so that was taken into consideration. But what's really interesting is I did get a couple of clients at that price point, and some of them were fine, but I ended up attracting some of the worst client contracts that I have, or some of the worst sales call environments that I put myself into. And as I was noticing this, pretty quickly after that, I also had the opportunity to work with a couple of people I was really excited about working with that were completely priced out at that new price point. So I made exceptions for them because it's my business and I can do whatever I want. And I changed what I offered them and made it a more accessible price point. And those became, honestly, some of my absolute top favorite clients I've ever worked with. And I no longer work with the people who entered at that falsely high price point from a few years ago. And I can look at that and see, for me personally, the people I like working with the most were priced out at that price point. And yes, that means that my offer has to change with a different price point. But I think these are questions that we really need to be looking at is A, what is the market? B, what is the target demographic? And what are the outcomes of that work that is going to help you decide what is this going to yield both for you and for the client? That's going to help determine price point. But just all in all, I always come back to your income goals are not your client's responsibility. And this is something that bothers me so much. Instead of thinking like, it's my goal to make six figures, so I need 8 clients at $1,000, 8,300 or whatever it is per month. Like, I need 8.3 clients a month to pay me $1,000 in order to break six figures. Instead of like reverse engineering it from your income goal, it needs to be about, there could be a whole episode on that, on ethical pricing, but just to say that blanket advice of just raise your prices, that's something that I had to learn the hard way. This is not what I want.
I think too, so there's some stuff that I want to address in there too, because I think we think about raising our prices in terms of our income goals. But I think that for me, when it came to raising my prices, it was a cost of living adjustment. So taking that into account when you're doing your pricing is really important, because in the last couple of years, we've seen inflation go absolutely insane. Rent prices, absolutely insane. And especially as somebody who is single and lives alone and has to support herself, currently staying with family in between leases, that was a really big factor for me, because what I charged when I started is not something that would sustain me now, even without rent. And so making sure that you're charging effectively for your time and your needs. And I think also not just thinking about what you're bringing in, but really taking a look at what you have going out. I'm not telling you to Dave Ramsey your shit, because I don't agree with 98%. Get your fucking Starbucks. I don't care. Treat yourself. But look at what subscriptions are you paying for that you're not using. Sit down and actually look at your numbers and know it, instead of avoiding it and just hoping that everything's okay because you're hitting a certain number.
Yeah.
There's so many other ways to build up your quality of life
Yeah.
without having to bring in more income.
I think that's such a good point, because I think that people talk a lot about flexing their revenue goals or flexing their revenue numbers. Oh, this is how much I have a multi-6 or multi-7 or whatever it is, figure business. And they never talk about profitability. Like,
no, they only talk about revenue.
Including coaches that I have worked with in the past, who, including the one who told me to raise my prices, when we started working together in different environments and I had a better idea of what was going on. Yes, I know how much revenue she makes. It's killer. I also know that my business is more profitable, right? And so then I'm not trying to emulate that. And I think it's related to the rest of this conversation too, because this idea that, okay, we can all acknowledge we're socialized from the time we're little to charge less, like for our art, right? From the time we're in early childhood development, like that study that you referenced, where we're socialized as women to charge less. And also, just raising your prices, even though it sounds empowering, is actually not ethical advice.
And especially too, if you're just raising your prices just to raise your prices and there's not
Right.
a why behind it other
Right.
than your revenue goal, you're not going to be as confident selling it.
Correct.
And that was a big thing for me because I did, like, when I first raised my prices, it was like, I don't now I know what my time is worth. I know what I need and I know what my time is worth. And I am confident with where my things are
Yeah.
priced and asking for it.
And that's the thing. I'm not saying not to raise your prices. I went ahead and acknowledged at the time that this coach told me to raise my prices, I absolutely needed to raise my prices. I did. So sometimes raising prices is the correct thing to do, definitely. And there are reasons to justify a price increase, definitely. And there are markets at all different price points for different types of offers. Like, definitely, that is definitely true. So it's not, I want to make sure that it's clear that I'm not telling you not to ask for money. I definitely think you should ask for money. But also, I think that it's false empowerment. It's a false sense of empowerment. And I think like a lot of bad advice out there in the business world, in the coaching world, comes back to this false idea of empowerment. Okay, I have two more questions for you. One is, what is something big and brave that you really hope to do or plan to do? Or some things. What's your big brave vision for yourself?
Feral Europe summer, I feel like, is a really big brave thing that I'm doing. If you listen to my podcast, but I am going to the UK. I'm going around the UK for a month. So I'm leaving Archie with my sister. And it is something that I have been putting off for 10 years. And that, especially like this time last year, I didn't think was ever going to happen with the way that my business was going, with the way that the market was. And the fact that I am doing that is big and brave. I'm also going to be doing the house sitting thing. We are balling on a budget, but like the fact that I'm going to be traveling around to different countries by myself, probably going on dates, I feel like is really cool.
Yeah, it is really cool. What about for a longer term vision? What are some big, brave visions you have for like your life in a bigger picture?
So many. Would like to move abroad. That would be one. Unfortunately, my dog is too big and part pity. But the other thing I think is, and I don't think I've talked to you about this yet, which is funny because we talk to each other all day, every day, especially about business ideas. Thinking of like a single entrepreneur like summit or retreat, or a Ditch the Ick summit or retreat. I really love planning trips. I really love hosting people and bringing people together and creating community. It's one of the things that I'm really good at. And so I'd really love to be able to do that like IRL on a trip. I just think that would be so cool.
Yeah, that's a really good one. Oh, I love that.
Maybe a reading retreat too for those of us readers.
Okay, we should totally do that. I've been thinking about a Big Brave Business book club in general, and I could totally see doing some kind of in-person thing for that as
I've
well.
been thinking about a Ditch the Ick book club. I think I talked about it on one of the episodes I recorded.
I love that. I love that. So I would say I agree with you. I have a million big and brave things I want to do. One big and brave thing I definitely want to do is sell a business. And I am not in the market to sell Podfox right now. I don't think it's as marketable as I'd like it to be. There's so much I still want to do with Podfox, but everything that I do with Podfox is with the end in mind, which is that ultimately I hope to sell that business one day. And so that's like a big thing that I'm calling in. It's interesting because I had someone, so I recently joined the National Association of Women Business Owners, and the local president of like the Phoenix chapter had a meet and greet type thing with me, and I was sharing that goal with her, and she was like, okay, yep, we're gonna help make this happen. I'm gonna introduce you to this person and this person, which by the way, that is the power of networking. But also,
sure.
she asked me such a good fucking question, which was, do you have a number in mind? And as much as I've been saying for 2 years, I'm gonna
Yeah.
build this business so I can sell it, girl, I do not have a number in mind. So I was
Sarah,
like,
that is
okay.
shocking to me
I know.
because
I was
we've
like,
talked about this so much in the year that I have known you. And it's like
yes.
one of the reasons I've come onto the team, right? Is part of that growth. You don't have to tell me the number,
No,
but
I
did you
will. Okay, no,
think
I have
about
no
it?
problem telling you. So when
Okay.
she asked me, I was floored, and I said, I really wish I had a great response for this? Like, in this moment, I'm like, that is such a good fucking question. And I wish I had a great answer. I said, honestly, the person who first put it in my head that I could possibly do this is a business broker. She helps people buy and sell businesses. And she has tried to podcast before. She ultimately does want to podcast, but currently does not have one. But her hope is to work with more younger, dynamic business owners to build businesses with the end in mind. And she specifically, as a business broker, works with the smallest of small businesses, which sell between $1 and $15 million. And when she told me this, I remember thinking, I could sell a business for $1 million. That feels crazy.
I'm sorry. I'm gonna need a second for that. The smallest of small businesses, $1 to $15 million.
Exactly. So I was like, I could sell for $1 million. I could sell a business for $1 million. That was the moment I had. We met, I think, probably in 2021. I had this conversation back then, and I was like, holy crap, I could sell this business for $1 million. That's so cool. Now, girl, I'm trying to build a business that the revenue is multi seven figures. So selling for $1 million doesn't even really seem like it makes any sense. But can I say out loud that I would want to sell a business for $5 million or shit, $10 million? Can I say that out loud that I don't even know what a $10 million like business acquisition looks like, let alone larger. Like I that's so hard for me to picture. What would Podfox look like to be worth $10 million in a sale? Like, that's wild to me. So anyways, I have more to learn. And so she's introducing me to some people to learn some more things. But she shared that she has a business that she had this vision of selling, and in her mind, it would sell between $4 and $7 million. That was her number that she had in her head, which, by the way, $4 to $7 million sounds great to me. Love it. I'm here for that. But also, some of the people that she's introducing me to helped her work out a business plan, a business model for her specific business, that there is a broker involved who estimates that if she were to build a business with this specific business model and this goal, this business plan over the next 10 years, that would actually sell for $40 million in 10 years. And she's introducing me to these people. We're having these conversations. I'm learning more. But I had this moment of $40 million. Of course, my initial reaction to that is, I can't do that. I can't sell a business for
That's literally what I was thinking.
That's not going to happen. That's unrealistic. That's not for me. But 40 million will at least help me think a lot bigger than 1 million. Okay, this story. But then the more that I've had time to sit with it, the more I think, okay, it's true that I don't know what Podfox would look like at that size. I really don't.
Yeah.
But, and maybe it's not Podfox that would be that level, right? I don't know. But what is interesting to me about it is, if anybody can build a business and sell it for $40 million, can't I? The only reason I can't right now is because I don't know what that looks like. But if I knew what it looked like, couldn't I do it? To me, that's what being big and brave in business looks like. Try saying that 5 times fast. And that's what the kind of conversations I want to have on this podcast, where let's take these thoughts that we're having, and people talk about, oh, you're playing small. And I understand the resistance to that, the soft life, things like that. I do understand that. I think that there's a place for both discussions. And I think that it is being big and brave to talk about where your boundaries need to be, and your mental health and your physical health and all. That is a whole thing. But I also think in general, yes, we are playing small. We are, because it's safer. And having these conversations that push you to think bigger, that is what I want to do here. So anyways, thank you so much for your first ever official podcast appearance on Big Brave Business. Definitely will not be the last. We had 100 other things on our list. So definitely you will be back. But I have to ask you our famous question for how we end episodes, which is, what is making you happy right now?
Oh, what is making me happy right now? So I am between leases, and I have been nomading, which is great. And honestly, I have a gypsy soul. It's wonderful. But what I am really happy about is that I have been able to spend the last month in Georgia with my sister and my niece and nephew. And my niece has become my little shadow. And it just makes me so happy, because she thinks that I am the greatest person in the world. She's 13 months, or however they count toddler age. But like, it lights up my soul to see her, and my nephew too. But she especially, like, when I come out of my room, she is a laser on me.
Aww.
And it's great.
Aww.
What's making you happy right now?
It's so hard not to be repetitive on here because I want to say, oh, these conversations, because they genuinely are. I'm having so much fun. Today alone, I'm recording 3 of these back to back, and they're honestly like, it's so fun.
Yeah.
But I have said that on here before. So I'm going to give another one. And that is, I just last night, which by the time this airs, it will be like weeks ago, but at the time we're recording this, just last night, I did 2 exciting things. One is going to sound way bigger and braver than the other, but I'm going to share them both. One is that I filed my trademark application for Big Brave Business, which is so fun and cool. So this is my second ever trademark that I've applied for. Podfox Media is already trademarked. I did it myself, represented myself, filled out the application. That got approved a few months back for Podfox. So that was a huge celebration. And then, so that's a registered trademark. And then I just finally applied for Big Brave Business, which is honestly something I've been meaning to do for a year and a half. So very thrilled that I got it in, I got it done. And wow, got it in on this podcast means something totally different than on yours.
Yeah, it's a very different context. I had to hold myself back, but thank you for calling me.
Okay, so anyways, I did that application last night and it felt easy. We'll see if there's any hangups on it. I am definitely not an attorney and I do not play one on TV. I do not know. I'm not an expert, but I am really excited about that big movement. And then the other fun thing that I did last night, which is going to be so different, is I got tickets to Hamilton this summer. Finally, it's a show. I am a theater kid at heart. I was a theater kid growing up. I love going to see shows. We have a really good off-Broadway or a Broadway touring circuit here in the Phoenix area at the university I went to and teach at, ASU, Gamage. We get a lot of really big, great shows for Broadway tours and off-Broadway tours. So Hamilton is coming back and I have never seen it and I've wanted to see it and I never gave in to spend the money. And because I teach there, I have the opportunity to get discounted tickets. So I did finally, and now it's been a few years too, so it's not as hot. So I finally was able to get us tickets to go see Hamilton. So Eric and I are going in July and I am so excited. So officially got tickets to see Hamilton live finally. So that's the other thing that it's bringing me a lot of joy.
I love that. I was thinking about that for London, is like Hamilton or The Cursed Child or something, because like they've been out for a minute, so maybe it won't be as aggressive, but we'll just see. I'm also trying to get some Taylor Swift tickets.
That will definitely be something that will bring us joy. You are just going to have to freaking
I'll FaceTime
me. And I know I'm not the only person in your life who cares about you or Taylor. I don't pretend that you'll do it for the whole time, but that would be so fun. I really hope this happens for you. I mean, we can have a whole Taylor conversation, but we won't. We've already been talking for an hour. Okay.
Yeah. We could talk for 4 and we have.
I know. And we will just on separate episodes. So thank you, Katie, for being here. If you want to connect with Katie and you haven't already, then definitely her information is all going to be linked in the description of the episode. And of course, how to connect with me too. So if we are not Instagram friends, although I don't do a lot on Instagram these days, but if we're not Instagram friends, if we're not Threads friends, Threads, they call them. If you're not a friend.
I thought we were just having a hard time with words. That's what they're actually called?
No, that's what they're. I don't think
I should know this.
From Threads. I think it's something that we just made up as Threads users, Threads.
Okay.
So definitely there. And also I've been hanging out on LinkedIn a lot lately. So come and connect. Well, a lot. All right. It's relative. I don't do a lot on social media, period. But I have been trying to hang out more on LinkedIn as well. So come hang out with me all the places too, if you aren't already. And Katie, thank you for joining me. And I can't wait to have you back.
Yay, thank you so much. This is so much fun.
And to you listening, thanks for being here. See you next week.